We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all here this evening. It is 6:03 on Wednesday, October 7th, 2020, and we're going to get started with our virtual information session for our long-range solid waste management plan. I'll give my presentation a second to load up on the opening slide. Okay, there we go. As I mentioned, we're going to get started with this meeting. My name is Sarah Mason. I am the Recycling Division Manager for the City of Houston with the Solid Waste Management Department, and I will be the moderator and facilitator of this informational meeting this evening. We will be presenting the draft of our long-range solid waste management plan and also hear comments and questions from you all. This is a virtual meeting, and it is being recorded and will be shared afterward on our department YouTube channel. I'd like to thank you all for participating in our discussion today and remind you that as this is a virtual meeting, we ask that you please keep your phone and computer muted during the meeting unless or until your name is called to provide comments. Next slide, please. So before you see the meeting agenda, we will have an overview presentation of the long-range solid waste management plan, last about 30 minutes, and include the background work completed, our goals established, and the recommended future actions. After the presentation concludes, we will take up to 15 minutes to address any questions received during the presentation. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so in the chat box. Please type the word question before your entry, and we will be monitoring the chat log during the presentation and we'll address those questions at the end up to 15 minutes. After that, we'll move on to the speaker list. If you would like to speak and share comments, please enter your name and request to speak in the chat box so we'll know who to call on. Some people are identified in the chat log only as guest, so we do need to know your first and last name, please, with the phrase request to speak. And if you are on the phone and not in front of a computer, we will call for speakers as well at the end of the presentation. You can briefly unmute yourself, announce your name, and we'll add you to the list. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to share their comments and/or questions, and the project team will respond to your comments at that time. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to a productive discussion, and we'll now begin the overview presentation. So to start out with, why does Houston need a solid waste plan? Why is it important? The city is responsible for the management of waste generated within Houston, either through our direct collections that we provide to residential units or through policy and partnerships with private haulers and community stakeholders for material coming from the commercial sector. As Houston has grown and the available solid waste infrastructure has been used and consumed, we need to focus on how those needs will be met in the future. The goals of the Solid Waste Management Plan are to provide long-term solutions for the city's solid waste management needs. We follow the integrated waste management hierarchy that you see on the right-hand side of the slide in order of the most preferred to least preferred way of handling waste. This plan is a 20-year plan, and it discusses how to improve service and right-size the solid waste management department and how to assure financial sustainability over the long term. It is also the basis for a zero waste management plan, how best to implement solid waste priorities of waste reduction, recycling, material recovery, and finally disposal. We are also identifying the needs of our solid waste infrastructure for the future. The plan will have an impact on all sectors of the Houston community, including residential, apartments, businesses, and institutions. Next slide. The project scope was written to lead to smart solutions, solutions that are action-oriented and where the results can be measured. The city asked the project team to take a very detailed look at the status of Houston's solid waste materials management ecosystem, which includes existing facilities, their status, and what will be needed in the future. They also looked at our current waste generation sources, both how much waste is generated and where it comes from, and then used that data to project the amount of waste that we can anticipate into the future. They looked at our current diversion programs and policies and compared those to adopted best practices in other communities. Finally, they evaluated our current services and ways of doing business and made recommendations on how to improve Houston's environment as well as the financial viability of the program. The draft plan contains a number of recommendations related to reducing waste, improving service, improving our local environment, and meeting future solid waste management needs, and improving the fiscal situation of the department. However, it will not be a final plan until we hear from you all and others in the city of Houston and have a chance to incorporate that feedback into the final plan. Next slide. Next. Thank you. All of the research and analysis I mentioned resulted in background documents to support the formation of goals and objectives of the long-range plan. Those background documents, including the facility analysis and report that looks at the physical solid waste infrastructure, which is our landfills, transfer stations, recycling facilities, composting facilities, and also the waste generation forecast and diversion report, which looks at how much trash and recycling we have now and predict to have in the future, and the analysis of our current programs and industry best practices, the funding assessment, and finally, the draft document can all be found on the project website. If you visit our main department website at houstonsolidwaste.org, you will find a link to the dedicated project website, and there you can find the complete and full documents of each of these for your reading enjoyment. Next, please. Once the background research was completed, we began convening the advisory task force appointed by Mayor Turner to assist the Solid Waste Management Department in completing this project. The task force includes representatives from the solid waste industry, including landfill operators, recyclers, composters, haulers, along with representatives from the Houston community, nonprofit sector, and academia. In total, there were 22 people appointed, and we've held 7 meetings over the last year and a half. At each meeting, the task force was presented information on the different analysis completed by the consulting team and asked to give feedback and guidance on the creation of a sustainable materials management strategy for Houston for the next 20 years. This group has given a lot of their time and their talent, and we are so appreciative of their help on this project. You can see the individuals listed here on the slide that have participated. Next. So where are we now? As I mentioned, our approach has been to identify Houston's needs and resources first, then identify a range of options available to the city, then develop a Houston-specific strategy for meeting current and future solid waste needs. The project team conducted a series of one-on-one interviews with people in the industry, city staff, and leadership, and compiled data on all the pieces of our materials management ecosystem. Then, with the help and guidance of the Mayor's Advisory Task Force, goals, objectives, and recommendations were drafted to provide Houston with a sustainable materials management program for the next 20 years. At this time, we are polishing the draft with the feedback and comments from our residents. This phase of the project is to gain public input through these informational meetings and requesting written comments on our website. In addition to the information meetings and website, we are also asking Houston residents to respond to our survey that is posted on the web. The survey is designed to gain your feedback, not just on the plan, but the performance of our department in providing service and your recommendations on improving those services. So I hope you will take a few minutes to check that out after today's meeting if you have not already completed it. The survey will be open until October 31st. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Carlton, our project manager on the consulting team, to walk you through the details of their findings and the recommendations of the plan.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to express my appreciation and gratitude for both you and Harry Hayes, your director, for letting us be part of this very important project, and believe that it provides a good comprehensive look at Houston's long-term needs, as well as coming up with some recommendations to address those needs over the long term. I also want to thank the members of the Mayor's Advisory Task Force for their participation and input. That input provided us with a better understanding of Houston's solid waste needs and put it in a very personal perspective in terms of what those task force members were looking for in terms of our plan recommendations. Next. I'm sorry. Next, please. The first thing that we did, as Sarah mentioned, was we did a pretty extensive evaluation of waste generation and facilities available to Houston for managing solid waste. Houston is unique as it relates to solid waste management. The Solid Waste Management Department provides service to nearly 400,000 households. Services provided include garbage, recycling, yard waste, tree waste, junk waste, collection. The Solid Waste Department also operates drop-off centers and environmental service centers where residents can take household hazardous waste. And one of the more interesting things that I learned as putting this together was the size of Houston and how expansive it is. It covers 640 square miles, and several large-scale cities could actually fit within the city's boundaries. This has, just these two factors alone have an impact on the city's equipment and personnel needs in order to provide service. Unlike most cities throughout the country, Houston pays for its solid waste management program through the general fund. Most other cities pay for it with an enterprise fund, which allows those departments to operate more like businesses. During my presentation, we'll discuss issues such as collection needs, facilities such as transfer stations and landfills, and other solid waste management needs. The city's program does rely on a mix of both public and private sector facilities, and in many ways it's a regional program. It's just not within the bounds of the city boundaries. More than 2/3 of the waste stream comes from businesses and institutions. And unlike the plan that was done in 1990 that I was actually able to participate in, this plan will look at the entire waste stream. Last time we did that, it just looked at the residential sector. This one looks at residents, businesses, multifamily sector, recognizing that all of these sectors are going to have to participate in order to address Houston's future solid waste issues. Next. Looked at some of the challenges that are facing Houston early on in this process. What are these challenges that the city's facing? There are several. Funding is one of the biggest challenges. As I mentioned, unlike other cities, the city does rely on the general fund as opposed to an enterprise fund. And in comparison to other cities, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail later, the amount Houston spends per household is significantly less. Because the funding source is from the general fund, solid waste must compete with other city priorities from this source. The city's increase in multifamily housing is also a unique problem that the city is facing. New approaches are going to have to be identified to deal with this sector and new programs implemented. The commercial sector, as I mentioned, accounts for a majority of the waste stream, about 3.5 million tons compared to 700,000 tons from the residential sector. If the city is going to achieve large-scale waste reductions, this sector has to be part of the solution. Storm events such as Hurricane Harvey and other events have increased over the years, and each year the city has to deal with major wind and flooding events. These events create large quantities of waste that need to be managed in a short period of time. Disposal capacity in the region is approximately 30 to 35 years. As local landfills reach capacity, the city will have to haul waste longer distances. And this is going to increase the cost of waste management in the future. To assure capacity is available over the long term, the city needs to be planning now because it takes approximately 10 to 15 years to secure new capacity. Houston currently relies 100% on the private sector for disposal of waste. Next. As Sarah mentioned, we looked at both waste generation and facilities. Houston residents, businesses, and institutions generate approximately 4.3 million tons of waste per year. If there are not major changes in the way that products are produced or the way that we manage waste stream, the waste stream will increase to about 5.4 million tons by the year 2040, just because of the growth in terms of houses, residents, and businesses over that time frame. It's just, as I mentioned, it's going to be essential that all sectors be involved in dealing with this issue. There are encouraging signs, though, in terms of the trends of waste management. We looked at recycling in the city and estimated that approximately 2 million tons are currently being recycled. Much of this is construction and demolition waste, but there are efforts by several businesses in Houston to make significant reductions in the waste that they're generating, and also to look at the way that they're producing products as a way of either reducing the amount of waste generated or to make those products more recyclable. We're optimistic about those changes and how they'll impact current trends in waste management. But to be safe, we plan for the worst case scenario so that the necessary facilities will be available over the long term. Next. As I mentioned, we looked at the entire solid waste infrastructure. It is a complex and regional system. When people think of waste management facility, they immediately think of a landfill. In fact, the region relies on a wide range of facilities to meet the needs of the city. These include material recovery facilities, which process recyclable materials you place in your recycling cart, scrap metal dealers, which have been around for a number of years, which buy recyclable paper, plastic, metals, and other recyclables, drop-off centers and recycling centers, which are operated by the city, where people can bring trash and recyclables. These facilities are often the best opportunity for residents of multifamily households to be able to participate in recycling. There are mulch and composting facilities that process yard waste, brush, tree waste, and in some cases, sludge and food waste. Transfer stations where waste is taken to be deposited and then put into more efficient long-haul vehicles, which is extremely important given the size of Houston and the traffic congestion that you face every day. And finally, landfills. These are engineered facilities with liners, covers, and regulated operating and closure standards. As part of the planning process, we did a very thorough evaluation of these facilities, and that documentation can be found on the city's solid waste website. Next. Disposal capacity is critical to meeting the city's long-term solid waste needs. We would like to get away from landfilling, and this plan is designed to be a long-term zero waste plan. But in the near future, we will be relying on these facilities, and they are a critical part of it. There are no silver bullets for completely eliminating landfills at this time. The city relies on every one of the landfills in the Houston-Galveston region. The landfills have an estimated capacity of approximately 30 to 35 years, assuming waste generation continues on its current path. For new capacity, either the city or private firms are going to have to identify an acceptable site, secure a permit from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which may include a public hearing, and then construct the facility. And as I mentioned, that could take approximately 10 to 15 years to complete. Next. Right now, I'd like to go through the goals, that were established by the Mayor's Advisory Task Force, a little bit of background information on each one of the categories that we'll be talking about, and identify the specific action recommendations that are in the plan related to these goals. Again, we want to thank the Advisory Task Force for their input. Not only did they help us establish goals, but they went through the program options that we presented them with and prioritized those. Next. We broke the goals and objectives into 5 major categories. The program focuses on sustainable materials management, quality service, infrastructure for materials management, financial sustainability, and finally, a beautiful city. Want to reduce waste through public education program, as well as incentives for better product stewardship, recycling and composting, quality and timely services to Houston residents, and to engage the commercial sector in the future years, providing the infrastructure to meet the city's long-term needs, making sure that the program is financially sustainable, and finally focusing on illegal dumping, cleaning up existing sites, as well as homeless encampments and increased litter control. Next. One last thing I want to mention on the goals and objectives. Those weren't necessarily ranked in a priority order. This is a comprehensive program, and all these elements are going to be necessary in order to meet the city's long-term needs. The first area that I want to talk about is sustainable materials management. As Sarah mentioned, this is designed to be a zero waste plan, in looking at ways to reduce waste that goes to the landfills, either through a variety of waste reduction methods or recycling and composting programs. We looked at, and also, I'm sorry, next slide, please. As Sarah mentioned, this is an integrated plan, and the hierarchy is to reduce waste, look for opportunities to reuse, and increase recycling. Right now, I'd like to ask Allison Trulock to talk a little bit about the challenges facing cities as it relates to the recycling programs.
Sure, Mike. And the 2 main problems facing every city's recycling programs are markets and contamination. And when we say markets, we mean when you put your recyclables in the recycling container and the city collects it, they take it to the processor sorts it out and bales it, and then sells those bales to the recycling markets. Recycling markets have always been very volatile, meaning the pricing can go up and down. And in these last couple of years, the pricing has been pretty steadily low because of some changes in who is importing our recyclables. So when the pricing is low, that means there's less revenue to be made for these recycling programs. The other piece is contamination, and contamination would be anything that doesn't really belong in the recycling cart, meaning it isn't part of the recycling program. So when contamination is collected along with the other materials, when it gets to the processor has to sort out those contaminants, and then it has to be hauled off to the landfill. So that decreases efficiency and increases cost. So those 2 impact both the decline in revenues and then also the increase in cost from those markets and contamination. Again, it's an issue facing pretty much every city's recycling programs today.
Thanks, Allison. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are doing, and Sarah mentioned it, is that we do have a survey out that we're looking for responses to get a better handle on Houston's residents' interest in this area, what they're doing, and your recommendations on what should be in the solid waste plan. We'll go through some of the results during this presentation. As it relates to recycling, Houstonians in general are participating in the recycling program. Over 60% say that their green bins are at least 80% full at the time of collection. Regardless of the responses regarding knowing what should go in the bins, which is a very high rate of about 90%, the city's contamination is a big issue. It's approximately 35% of what goes to the material recovery facility, and something that we're focused on. Most people have indicated that if they live in an apartment, approximately 68%, they did not have access to recycling. 60% of the people that responded did not have recycling at their workplace. Next. The recommendations that the advisory task force came up with for the sustainable materials management section of the plan are quite extensive. If you go through the plan, you can see a number of recommendations dealing with all sectors of Houston. I'll just go through some of the key points, and those are to adopt the climate action plan recommendation for residential reductions of 50% of residential material by 2040, enhance public information, public education programs, enact measures to significantly reduce contamination in the residential recycling program, enhance multifamily recycling efforts, initially through public information programs and then looking at a mandatory program. Next. Enhance private sector source reduction and recycling efforts, initially through public information efforts and coordinated programs, and then finally looking at the potential for mandatory programs throughout the city. Encourage greater food waste management through reduction, food donations, and finally composting. Divert sludge to composting facilities. And finally, improving the data gathering and program evaluation system that the city has in order to better manage that program and target where the best results can come from. Next. Second area I'll be discussing is quality service being provided by the department. The task force spent a lot of time talking about the need to improve the city's services and how to accomplish that. We understand that this is a very personal service that every person in Houston gets, and the city wants to provide the best service available. Next. As I mentioned earlier, the city does provide a full range of services to residents, including garbage and recycling service as a base service, monthly bulk waste collection, weekly yard waste collection, comprehensive environmental programming, including household hazardous waste and drop-off sites, the reuse warehouse and neighborhood depository sites, great waste disposal and recycling processing contracts, and a successful disaster debris management program. It's incredible what Harry Hayes and his team are able to accomplish given the resources that are currently available to them. The department is involved in a number of efforts to enhance the local environment through recycling and other programs. Next. Again, on the survey, there's obviously a mixed response in terms of the level of service that is being provided. The city knows that it needs to do a better job and believes that with the right resources, it can accomplish that. The graph illustrates residents filling their cart at the time of collection. You can see that a majority of folks are above 60% in terms of how full their cart is on the day of collection. What this plan is intending to do is to flip that chart around, where a majority of individuals' carts are less full with solid waste and more full with recyclable materials. Next. As I mentioned, this is a service that's very personal to everyone in Houston, and the city wants to provide quality service. What the recommendations in the plan are is to right-size the operations by expanding fleet and staffing to meet citizen commitments. And this would allow the city to better route or allocate their routes so that waste is collected on time, and that's accomplished through sufficient staffing and equipment. Second, to modernize the collection fleet. We've looked at the collection fleet that the city has. I know that the city is making an effort to improve the efficiency of that system by buying new trucks, but it has a long way to go yet. So that continue to focus on modernizing the fleet, expand the number of drop-off facilities and household hazardous waste collection services to make them more available throughout the city, provide safe, efficient, responsive services in times of heavy storms or other disaster events, and provide efficient, safe, and responsive services in times of, yes, next slide, please. Third area that I want to talk about is the infrastructure for management. In 2019, the city took a big step in meeting their goal with the construction of the FCC material recovery facility. This facility is owned by the city and processes the recyclable materials from Houston households and businesses. In the coming years, the city will need to improve its existing transfer stations, add more drop-off centers, and evaluate ways to make sure that there is a place to dispose of waste. Next. The Houston region has 12 municipal waste landfills, that's garbage material going into the landfills, and 15 construction and demolition landfills. Capacity is decreasing annually. We have also talked about an aggressive waste reduction and recycling program. However, even with big changes in waste management practices, the city will continue to rely on landfill disposal for the foreseeable future. Houston transfer stations are over 20 years old and in need of repair. David, I know that you did a study on those facilities a couple of years ago. Do you want to talk briefly about that?
Sure. Now, we did a study in 2012 looking at those three facilities, and it was identified back then, 8 years ago, that about $8 million needed to be expended to either replace components that were outdated or had to be upgraded, or just to plan for continued growth. So yes, over $8 million of projects were identified.
Thanks, David. Next, please. Again, going back to the survey, we asked about the city's role in planning future disposal capacity. An overwhelming number of residents agreed that the city needs to have an active role in planning. Approximately 76% agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Next. So the recommendations that are in the plan as they relate to the infrastructure for the city's solid waste program include constructing a northeast transfer station, investing in the existing transfer stations, making the improvements similar to the ones that Dave just mentioned, site and permit a new city-owned landfill. This could be a facility that is owned and operated by the city, or similar to the way that the city handles its transfer stations, which is that the city owns and controls those facilities, but contracts the operation out to a private firm. I evaluate closed facilities for brownfield. It's a multi-year process, and there are significant challenges. It would be necessary to start this process sooner to get that process underway, and the city has done that with a project currently in place right now of converting a brownfield site into a solar farm. And then finally, evaluate rail haul as a long-term option for the city in terms of getting waste to a solid waste facility. Several communities, large-scale communities, are using this option as a way of dealing with transportation issues and the fact that you can't site landfills in the middle of large urban areas. And then finally, track and evaluate resource recovery technologies for meeting the city's future waste management needs when they're environmentally, technically, and economically feasible. Next. The fourth area that we want to talk about is assuring financial sustainability. Houston needs a more sustainable funding source to be competitive with other cities and provide the quality service to residents while expanding efforts towards a sustainable materials management program. The program is extremely underfunded and relies on the general fund for its budget. Most city funds fund their program through a monthly service fee and environmental fees. This reduces the possibility that in rough budgetary times, the program is still able to adequately buy equipment necessary to maintain a staffing level that results in quality, efficient, and economical service. Next. I want to spend a little bit of time going through a comparison that we did as it relates to budgets and staffing levels compared to some of the other major cities in Texas, including San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin. Some of the key numbers to look at here is that the city of Houston provides service to over 390,000 households the year that in 2021 when we were comparing these cities. And you can see the staffing level, households served per employee, that's per FTE, 893 households served per employee in Houston compared to 570 in San Antonio, 466 in Dallas, and 434 in Austin. So approximately twice as many households served per employee, and the same relationship or ratio applies to the amount budgeted per household in comparison to these cities. And what it does show is that Houston is operating extremely efficiently, but it also shows that it's underfunded in order to provide the quality service necessary. I emphasize, those numbers demonstrate where Houston is and compared to other cities. Next slide, please. Just briefly want to provide a comparison to what other cities are charging in terms of their monthly fees. Those fees range between $15 and $50 per household per month. Environmental fees, which the monthly service fee applies to residents that receive service from the city, such as your weekly collection service. The monthly environmental fee typically pays for a range of services that apply citywide, such as cleaning up illegal dump sites and homeless encampments and the operation of the drop-off centers, programs that are available throughout the city. Depending on the level of, these fees range in terms of the size, and you can see a relationship to the size of that fee and the level of service provided, as well as their success with their recycling programs. Next. So if the city were to become more financially sustainable, what would be the result? The city would be able to right-size its collection operations with the necessary collection equipment and staffing, increase the number of depositories throughout the city. The city has 6. It needs about 5 more to meet demand and coverage throughout the city. Increase the number of inspectors needed to address illegal dumping and enforcement. And then provide the first-class service programs that are designed to reduce waste generation and improve the quality of the materials being recovered. Next slide, please. We asked in the survey whether or not residents support a fee either for the expansion and improvement of service or to properly size the program to allow for growth. And as you can see, there's a split among Houston residents in terms of the importance of that fee. And It is a divided response, but we feel that through education programs and a better understanding of the city's situation, those numbers could change dramatically. Next. The financial sustainability program actions include establish funding mechanisms that provide long-term financial sustainability for solid waste management needs. These funding mechanisms include a monthly service fee, environmental fees for all sectors, and grants. Secure alternative funding sources for paying for solid waste management, including grants and partnerships. Provide services utilizing best management practices. Evaluate opportunities to provide financial assistance for low-income homeowners, similar to the water program. This was an area that the task force spent a lot of time talking about, making sure that this was an equitable program. And then finally, evaluate opportunities for public and private partnerships. Next. Clean and beautiful cities. One of the key priorities of the task force was to address illegal dumping. The city's program needs more resources and better enforcement. Next. Some of the major issues associated with illegal dumping include the increasing number of illegal dump sites, insufficient number of drop-off centers throughout Houston, the fact that disposal costs are increasing, and it's easier just to put things in an illegal dump site than properly dispose of them, and lack of funding for both enforcement and cleanup. The map illustrates the various council districts. Those dots represent the location of sites. I believe it was approximately over about a 1-year period. So you can see the significant number of sites that the city had to deal with and continues to deal with. Next. We did ask about people using the drop-off sites. People that responded to this know about those sites and use them. 93% of the respondents felt it was important for the city to have an active anti-litter and illegal dumping program. Next. So the recommendations that the city or the task force came up with were to reduce litter throughout the city, presenting a more beautiful and healthier Houston, enhance efforts to reduce throughout the city, increase the number of drop-off centers, more aggressive enforcement, improve communication among enforcement officials, and to continue to clean up homeless encampments. Next. So the chance to go through the 5 major areas that the task force focused on. And there are a number of recommendations in the plan that deal with all of those 5 areas. In the near term, what we are recommending in the plan are some of the key issues, including secure financial sustainability for the program, right sizing of service operations, establish best practice fleet replacement schedule, enhance customer engagement and education, initiate future waste disposal outlets now, strengthen the transfer station operations, multifamily and commercial waste management reductions, and enhancing the city's recycling program. Recognizing that all of these actions, this is a plan, this is a guide that the department and the task force have put together. For any of those actions to actually happen, it's going to require council action to implement and fund those programs. Next. So what are the next steps? I do appreciate everyone that participated or is participating in this public meeting. Appreciate you taking the time out to learn about both the solid waste issues facing the city as well as what's in the plan. We're interested in your feedback before we finalize that plan. So we'll take that public input from tonight's meeting as well as the meetings that we have planned next week, revise and update the plan, present it back to the task force, and then finally present it to the city council. And then it's up to them to fund and implement those programs. Next. And here is how to both evaluate or review the plan and the other reports that we prepared. And we are looking for comments, and we are looking for your response to the survey. And I want to thank everybody for, again, taking their time, and we're looking forward to your comments and questions that you may have on the plan. Sarah?
All right. Okay, thank you, Mike. That was a great overview, and we appreciate everyone who has joined us in the meeting this evening. As we mentioned from the beginning, we did want a very detailed product here, and so there was a lot of research and effort that went into it. Right now we are going to start with reviewing. We've had several questions come in on the chat, so I'm going to go through those, and I will be calling upon the project team to help out with those questions. For those of you who joined us before we got started, you probably saw a couple of slides with the information and introduction of our project team. But for those of you who joined later, just so that you know, the presentation that was just concluded was given by Mike Carlton. He's our project manager on the consulting team. He's with AZ&B LLC consulting firm in Dallas and has many years experience working in the solid waste community. We also have Dave Yonke and Allison Trulock with New Gen Strategies. They're on the call, and part of our team both have a lot of experience. Dave with financial assessments and Allison in the waste reduction and recycling world. Risa Weinberger is on the call. She has several decades experience in composting and organics, and then as well as Tammy Wallace with InFocus Strategies. She is helped out with our public engagement piece. So just in case you do hear people speaking as we go through the questions, you'll know who they are and their role in the project. So I'm going to get started here. Well, the first question, which I do think we answered in the chat, was, will this presentation, these slides, be available? And yes, they will. We will be adding them to the project website in the Documents tab, where all of the other background reports and the draft plan itself are currently located. So you will be able to review it there, as well as a reminder, we are recording this meeting and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel afterwards. So you can review it there as well. We had some folks, just some comments on finding out what you can put in your recycling, and we recognize it's not always the easiest to know. We are working on some solutions, so I'll just tell you to stay tuned. We've got some exciting things coming out from the department. We had a question around composting. The question is composting an option with this plan? And I will call on Risa to talk about that. She did most of the research in the organics and has the information on what we looked at around composting and the recommendations.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, we absolutely did consider composting and composting facilities in this plan. Houston, as you know, collects yard waste, curbside, and tree waste, and then that's from the single family residential sector, and that material goes to composting facilities through contract with the city, composting facilities located around the city, and that's been a long-term relationship. We also have the benefit of many other private composting facilities located in the region, and some of them are able to accept sludge or biosolids, food waste, and other organics besides yard waste. And one of the things that we have addressed in the plan is the need to try to support and encourage the development of more composting facilities, particularly that can take yard waste as well as biosolids closer into the city. But composting is definitely addressed throughout the plan as one of the options for managing organics.
Much. We also do have a question in our survey about curbside composting, just to see that isn't something that we've done in Houston yet, but is done in other communities. There are some challenges, but we are asking that question to see what the level of interest is. So I appreciate all that information. The next question we had was, are emerging chemical recycling technologies such as pyrolysis being considered as part of the infrastructure? And that's a very good question. For those who are paying attention to the recycling industry over the past, I'd say, year or so, you're starting to hear a bit more about what's called chemical recycling, or energy recovery from plastics, pyrolysis. These are technologies that are a little bit different from your traditional waste to energy technologies, and are starting to gain some interest and some traction as you see corporations put into place recoverability goals for plastic packaging that's produced. And I do know that there's some stuff going on in Texas. There's some interest in that as well. And so I think the plan makes the recommendation that the city monitor and pay attention to those things, but I will let Mike take that question and expound upon what's going on in the world of chemical recycling and pyrolysis. I will say the difference there, the reason it's called chemical recycling is, I guess, traditional recycling would be called sort of mechanical recycling, which is just the separation of the items as is, where chemical recycling does transform it into something else.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'll just add, you covered it fairly well. There are some major advances that are being taking place related to pyrolysis and chemical recycling. There are plants that are being built across the country, and the plan does recommend that the city continue to track that technology and work with partners that have projects that, again, meet those three criteria of being environmentally acceptable, technically sound, and economically sound as well. So it does look at that technology, and again, it is part of the plan.
Yeah, well, some of these emerging factors, and recommendation that is given is that the city monitor it and be open and aware of the opportunities as they're developing.
The only thing that I would add on that, Sarah, is one of the things that holds that back is the fact that the state of Texas, Houston included, has relatively low landfill fees. These technologies require a significant amount of capital, and so that's one of the things that has to be part of that evaluation.
Great. Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. Thank you. Just a reminder to those on the call, if you and in the meeting, if you have questions, type them in the chat box. We are monitoring that, and we'll continue with what we've received. The next question is, the FCC MRF the only one that takes the City of Houston recyclable material? I will answer that one. And for our single stream curbside material, yes, FCC is the MRF that gets 100% of the volume we collect within that program. We do also collect materials in our drop-off programs, and we utilize some different recyclers for those, depending upon mostly logistics and proximity to the locations, and then also sometimes available revenue revenue, if any. You heard Allison mention earlier, the recycling market has always been dynamic, but it's been particularly volatile and depressed over the past couple of years. So there's been less revenue available, but we do use some other recyclers for some of those materials, but for our curbside program, FCC is the exclusive processor. The next question was, in this plan, will there be financial incentives for organics diversion to businesses and residents? I think I'll call on Dave for this, given the financial piece of the question, and see if you can respond.
Sure. You know, depending what the city wants to do as far as moving forward with some type of user fee, which we would strongly recommend because that's the norm in the industry, you can price in certain or create incentives for those types of options. So it just depends how far the city wants to go with incentives with regard to that type of program. So first of all, you have to get a user fee, and then yes, you can do that type of thing.
Great, thank
Sarah,
you.
Can I add something to that just really briefly?
Oh, yes.
This is Risa. There is sort of an inherent economic incentive when you're talking about the commercial sector, commercial and industrial sector. We recognize that there is a lot of opportunity to recover organics, additional organics from that sector. And to the extent that organics or other recyclables can be collected and managed more economically than sending that material to a landfill, which is very, very often the case with composting, for example. There's an inherent financial incentive in that without the city having to provide additional incentive.
That's right. Thank you, Risa, for pointing that out. The next question is about how will solid waste fees affect school districts? And so I'm going to call on Dave again to answer that one. I will mention just briefly, the city doesn't provide direct collection service to school districts, so it wouldn't be a user fee for them, but I'll let him, expand upon that.
Yeah, I've worked with a number of cities. It just depends. If the city is not providing solid waste services to the schools, then it's not going to be an issue. It's not like stormwater fees where there can be certain fees that, are depending, schools could be exempt or non-exempt. It's not that type of issue here at all. If the city is not providing solid waste services to the school district, that's not going to be an issue.
Okay, thank you. You might stay on the line. I might call on you and Mike for this next question. So since the economics of recycling programs are difficult, has it been considered to offer tax breaks to companies that provide recycling services? I'm not sure if they're referring to companies who are in the recycling business or companies who that's not their main line of business, but who are offering it, say, in their workplace or place of business, if it's a restaurant or something like that.
Sure. I'll start, Mike, I'll let you chime in, but what we've seen with our clients, again, on the commercial side, if it's businesses, what they're focused on, for instance, even with the volatility in the recycling market, we are still seeing, for instance, the big box stores, the Best Buys, Walmarts, they've got compactors that are taking the corrugated cardboard that they get in with all their shipments, and they are shipping it out to be turned into new boxes or paper or what have you. So the market is driving that right now with regard to specific incentives as far as for recycling. That would become a policy issue for the city, and I'll defer there.
Great, thank you, Dave. Mike, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I briefly mentioned the fact that, low tipping fees at landfills, what they charge. has an impact on the economics of resource recovery, but that is beginning to change. And as the cost of disposal goes up, the benefits of reducing your waste and recycling that material increase, so that as we see facilities close, the financial incentives just for the business improve in terms of taking action there. But in terms of providing specific dollar incentives for those programs, I think the city's looking at more coordination and trying to bring together generators of material with the potential markets to improve that system as a way of addressing that commercial sector.
And I'll just add too that we do have the strategy for technical assistance. And Mike, I think that's what you were just getting at there, for the city to provide some technical assistance for those businesses, help them sort out those issues.
Yeah, Allison, I appreciate that. I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit more. I was also thinking about the strategies around market development, both in supporting policies for purchasing items with recycled content, and then also just finding, recycling is a very loosely connected but highly dependent system. And so it's everything from when you put your stuff in your cart to when our truck picks it up to when it goes to the MRF, which is the material recovery facility, gets separated, and then when it's sold. But ultimately, you have to have someone who's interested in buying it. And so that market development thing, I'll let Allison expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you made a few good points there I want to touch on with some of the strategies that are included in the plan. And one of them is the city leading by example. So it's the city's purchasing policy, so that they're trying to promote recycled content or just waste reduction, specifically, just not have to generate the waste in the first place. So by leading by example and encouraging those recycled content, the city is directly involved. With the technical assistance programs that I was mentioning, that's in the plan for both commercial business entities as well as multifamily. And again, that's to help them get the program set up. And then the city's involvement in helping to kind of develop those markets to receive the materials. One area where we see a lot of opportunity for that is really on the construction and demolition side of things, where there's potential opportunity to be able to recycle those kinds of materials. Was there something else specific on traditional recyclables you wanted me to touch on, or did that cover it?
No, I think you've covered it. Yeah, I just like to always emphasize the point that you do have to close that loop, and you've got to get it from the user of the material all the way to someone who's buying it as an end user of the material, who's going to turn it back into a new product. Before I let you go, Allison, another question did just pop in. Where can we learn more about the technical assistance plan mentioned by you just now?
Okay, and that actually is in the plan document, and that plan document is on the web page that's up on the screen now, if you can still see the PowerPoint. And so the area where there's the section 8 is where it goes into all the different strategies, but there is some information further up in the plan document itself that describes it in a bit more detail for technical assistance.
Yeah, and this isn't a program that we currently have, because we do not have those ordinances requiring the recycling the way some other cities do. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the way some other cities have addressed that and what they actually offer in terms of technical assistance.
Sure, and in some communities that already have these programs in place, it would be city staff actually going out to the site. So it would be voluntary. So the business or the multifamily complex would reach out to the city and say, hey, we'd like to talk more about how we can recycle. The city would send staff to the site to basically do an audit of the site to see what the challenges might be. Those challenges are very different for multifamily versus businesses, and then actually develop a plan for that business or that multifamily complex for who they could reach out to, how they could get around some of the logistics issues, and basically give them all the information they need to be able to set up the program for themselves. Another thing we touch on a little bit in the planning document is being able to track what's happening with those businesses or those multifamily. So that helps the city kind of keep telling a positive story as more and more businesses and multifamily complexes reach out for that voluntary assistance. if they're reporting back to the city, it kind of helps, build that story of success and even lessons learned to keep helping other businesses and multifamily complexes.
Great, thank you. So I did say that we would do questions and answers for about 15 minutes after the presentation and then move to anyone who wanted to speak. I don't see that we have anyone who's wanting to share comments out loud. So we have another question. And just a reminder that if you did want to join on the call and share your comments out loud, just to type your name and the phrase request to speak into the chat box, and we can call on you to do that. But we will just go ahead and take this next question. The question is, any resources that can be recommended for businesses interested in expanding organic waste diversion and upcycling? I guess I will open this up to the project team. Does anyone have a specific resource that you would recommend to a business who wants to do more organic waste diversion or upcycling?
Well, let me just say that the private sector in Houston is very active in trying to collect organic materials for the various private composting facilities in the region. And I would say it kind of depends on what kind of material you have. But the first thing that I would do is I would start with the processors and see if I could find, and you can get information on this in the plan. There, the processors, the composters are listed with the types of feedstocks that they can accept. If you are a business, I would call those processors and say, hey, can you take my material? Here's how much I have. And very often they can help you with the transportation piece. But those are typically not hauled by the city. They're hauled by private haulers to the composting facilities. But that would be one way to start with it. And let me just add that what Allison was saying about technical assistance for recycling, if the city were to implement that, and it's one of the things addressed in the plan, that would absolutely address organics along with traditional recyclables as well. So that technical assistance team, if it were to be implemented, would be a great resource to connect you with a hauler and with a processor.
Great. Thank you, Risa. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, Sarah, if I can just add, and again, one of the things we've seen over the last 15 years in the Houston area and even the greater Houston area beyond Houston and into Harris County and beyond, there's just been a huge increase, Lisa's point, of the private sector that has organics processing facilities, whether it's for food waste, or they're creating mulch, compost, whatever, but in tree trimmings. But we've seen a huge growth from like 2005, there were about 4 or 5 facilities to now there are like close to 20 major facilities throughout the region. So I would encourage those folks to look at that, because that can be a very cost-effective diversion option. And as I like to say, that can really move the needle.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Sorry, did someone else have on the team?
Yeah, it's me.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Hi. Yes, Director Hayes.
Yeah, I just want to make certain that everyone knows that in addition to this wonderful team that we put together, we have other partners that have plenty of information available, for home and for business. The Houston Galveston Area Council. We partner with the TCEQ as well as with the EPA within our region and leverage their resources as well. To the question earlier about how to get started, in addition to the information that we have on our website, I've often found that, I believe it's Earth 911. They have wonderful information that we routinely refer folks to, as does our arm partner, which would be Keep Houston Beautiful. Keep Houston Beautiful is an arm of the Solid Waste Department, and they help us with all of our programming and services. And they are available to our customer community and our business community.
Great, thank you so much. We have received one request to speak, so I will call on Randall Baxley to speak. You will have 2 minutes to share your comments. And just a reminder, if you will, when you unmute yourself, just speak your name and tell us the comments that you'd like to share with us. Go ahead, Randall.
Yes, this is Randall Baxley, and live in the near north side, 77009. And of course, the recycling, I look forward to a technical team being able to actually help us in some fashion with an app that helps us to figure out what to recycle. But as far as the dumping in our neighborhoods, I sympathize with the contractors in that a contractor trying to figure out what from a site they're working on and putting in their truck could actually go to the different landfills and the 20 different locations that you've talked about, and those locations, when they're open, when they're not, how to time themselves to get all of that so that they don't go look for some pile that a neighborhood person has put out and then add to that pile. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much. So if I'm understanding, I think that's a good suggestion that maybe there's an opportunity to provide more information on, because we do have our neighborhood depositories, which residents are able to use. They are not open for commercial material, but maybe there's an opportunity to share more information about the private facilities that are open to accept that waste, where to go and when they can go.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Did anyone on our team have anything else they wanted to share in response with Randall's comment?
No, I just think it's a good recommendation to have that resource available on your website. It's a good recommendation.
And Sarah, I did want to address Mr. Baxley directly, in addition to what Mike has indicated. Unfortunately, Mr. Baxley, the folks who do this know exactly what they're doing. They are illegally dumping. I think when Mike referred to that slide, we get about 7,000 to 9,000 illegal dump sites a year. And these are people who go out and they do small jobs for folks, and they charge them a disposal fee, and then they pocket that money. And so it's not that they don't know where to go and dump, it's that they choose not to. And so that's part of the enforcement activity where we are woefully underfunded, not only in the solid waste department, but also in the Department of Neighborhoods and the Houston Police Department. We would like to catch these people. We would very much like to prosecute them. But again, as Mike pointed out, we have 640 square miles. And I can tell you, having ridden all of them, I am amazed at just how expansive our system is and how easy it is for someone to find a spot and illegally dump. They don't, it's not that they're out there an hour or two. They dump and go, in just a matter of seconds. Not only the trash, but also medical equipment, medical supplies that are used, and certainly a lot of scrap tires, which is not just a Houston problem, it's a Texas problem.
Great, thank you. And for those, I should also introduce the gentleman who was just speaking as Harry Hayes, who's the director for our solid waste department. So he certainly is knowledgeable about all things solid waste as well and has that information. Okay, so I don't know that we have any further questions. Were there any other attendees on the call who wanted to share some comments with us out loud, who would like to speak? I think we just had a person join, so if you did just join the meeting and if you would like to speak, please just type your name and request to speak in the chat box and we will call on you to share your comments out loud. Or if you just have questions, you can type those and we can address those also. While we see if there's anyone who has other questions or comments they want to share, Mike, is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't covered yet?
No, as I mentioned when we started this, it is a comprehensive plan that, you know, all of those areas need to be addressed. It's not like the city can just pull one out and say, this is where we're going to focus. And that the city's budget definitely needs more resources in order to tackle all four of those areas. So
yeah, I would ask, you know, in your experience, I know that you work with several other cities in the state on different solid waste issues. You know, is Houston ahead of the curve here? We can see out that we're gonna have a landfill issue, or are we behind? What are your thoughts?
it is interesting. Excuse the noise, the background noise there for a minute. In terms of disposal, we're seeing several regions of now starting to have to face the same type of issues that Houston has to deal with. So you have time to deal with that in terms of planning for that future disposal. It is easier, and I use that term lightly. It's never easy, but cities have a much better chance of going through that siting and permitting process a lot of times under today's environment than it was in the past. In terms of recycling, I think that, you know, Houston has a little bit catching up to do. I know that you've got your program in place, you've got a great processing facility, but when you look at disposal rates, Houston's got some catching up to do, and I think with the right resources, you'll be able to do that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I know that we are always working to improve our recycling program. We'd like to grow the participation on that and improve our contamination rate. And I know that we're going to be working on getting some more information out to everybody on, you know, how to interact with their bin and to recycle bottles, cans, paper, and cardboard in their cart every week. Oh, I see. I think we have maybe another question. Okay, request to speak. So thank you. I see Wendy Young. If you would like to go ahead and take yourself off mute and share your comments.
Thank you for reminding me to take myself off mute. That would have been tricky. I just wanted to thank you all for a really great presentation and all of this work. I've been following the recycling space for a number of years, and so I appreciate the amount of work that went into this plan. And I just wanted to thank you all for that, and then say that I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of it.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. You've had several good comments here. It does seem like you know a lot about it. So we really appreciate you being engaged and joining the meeting this evening. Okay. Well, I don't know if there's any other questions or other information that we'd like to share before we end our meeting. We are scheduled to have the meeting space until 8 o'clock, but I don't want to keep you here unnecessarily. I'd like to continue the discussion, though, if anyone has any other thoughts or questions they want to share, either from our project team or our attendees.
Well, I'll just say thank you to everybody that participated. You're stretching our brains a little bit, which is a good thing. And I appreciate, your thoughtful comments and questions.
And then, yeah, I know that Tyra, you've been Tyra Wilkins with our solid waste department. I should acknowledge Tyra, who is our public information officer, and also Abel Fernandez, who's our creative services manager with the department. They've been helping us out with the meeting today, monitoring our chat log and driving the slides for us. So thank you so much. And Tyra, was there anything else that you saw in the chat or any other that I've missed? Any questions or requests to speak?
No, you've covered everything.
Any reminders you want to give the folks that are on the call?
None at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Great, thank you. So just a reminder again, you can go to houstonsolidwaste.org. That is the Solid Waste Management Department website, and from there is a link to the Long Range Plan website. And there you can find a link to the survey. Reminder to take that, please, if you haven't, and encourage your friends and family to do so. It's open until October 31st. You can also find on the documents page all the background documents if you want to look for more resources on solid waste facilities, existing facilities and infrastructure, if you want to dive into more details behind how much waste and recycling we're currently generating and what we're projecting to generate. And then if you want to look, if you haven't already, at the full plan that we've presented this evening in detail, you can download either the full document, or it is broken out into sections. If you want to download just the executive summary or just the recommendations section, you can. Thank you. And Tyra just popped the link to the plan website in the chat box there. That will take you directly there. So you can download those different sections. You can email us any further comments that you may have at longrange@houstontx.gov. That information is also on the web, and we'll definitely be incorporating all of this into the final plan. So thank you very much for your time and attendance. I'm going to just give it a few more minutes to see if anybody has any last questions. I don't want to end too early. Great. So I will just acknowledge, I see one last comment here from Randall, which is a good one, looking at the survey. And yes, so bin tagging and also public information, they're both really important. We have found the Recycling Partnership, which is a national nonprofit organization, has done a lot of work with communities, and they have found it to be pretty effective to give residents direct feedback on their cart, but also to provide general information through direct mail and through social media, utilizing Facebook and Google ads to get information out about the program. So absolutely, it is a comprehensive approach to do both of those things, let people know how they can improve what they're putting in their recycling cart, as well as a general reminder. And since I've got the time, I will just remind all of you on the call, you're probably pretty dedicated if you're here with us this long, and I appreciate that. Please remember to recycle your clean and empty bottles, cans, paper, and cardboard in your cart. So that's the things from your kitchen, bath, and laundry. So soda cans, soup cans, plastic water bottles, your shampoo bottle, and all your paper and cardboard, also glass bottles and jars. So just a reminder that those are the things we're looking for, and we appreciate you participating and being a good recycler. I have to put that in there for everybody. I guess if there is nothing else from either the project team or our attendees, we will adjourn early. I'm going to leave the meeting open until 7:30. A reminder, if you would like to hear this presentation again, or if you are interested, we'll have another meeting next Tuesday, October 13th from 2 to 4 p.m. And then if you happen to know any high school students or college students in this subject, we are going to have a student invitation to have a conversation with our leaders of tomorrow on Wednesday, October 14th from 5 to 7 p.m. So we have those meetings coming up. The details are on our website as well. And thank you again so much for your time and attention and feedback this evening. Okay, the time is now 7:30 and I will be closing the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Good night, Sarah. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you all.